The front door was already open when I got there. I remember standing on the porch steps, one hand on the railing, listening to the noise coming from inside. Music, laughter, the smell of something expensive being grilled. I hadn't been invited. I hadn't even called ahead. I just drove 4 hours because my son hadn't answered his phone in 11 days. 11 days. I told myself he was busy. That's what I told my wife too before she passed 3 years ago. She used to say, "Go check on him, Walter." I always said he was fine. He was 31 years old. He didn't need his father showing up unannounced. But 11 days. I knocked anyway. Nobody heard me over the music, so I just walked in. The living room was full of people I'd never seen before. Nice clothes, drinks in hand, the kind of easy laughter that comes when nothing in your life is actually wrong. My son's wife, Leah, was standing at the center of it all in a white dress. Hair done, holding court like she'd just won something. She had this way of filling a room, Leah did, not warmth exactly, more like pressure. I didn't see my son at first, then I did. He was in the kitchen, and I only noticed him because someone called out for more ice and he came around the corner carrying a bucket. He was wearing a plain gray t-shirt, while every guest around him had on cocktail attire. His hair was unwashed. He had circles under his eyes so dark they looked bruised. He set the ice down without making eye contact with anyone, turned to go back to the kitchen, and that's when Leah said it, loud enough for the room. "Don't mind him, he gets anxious at parties. He's more comfortable just, you know." She made a little gesture toward the kitchen and laughed. The guests laughed too. A couple of them didn't even look up. My son kept walking. I stood there in the doorway for maybe 4 seconds. Long enough that a woman near me noticed and whispered to her husband. Long enough that Leah turned and finally saw me standing there. Her smile didn't drop. It just changed. "Walter," she said. What a surprise. I wasn't looking at her. I was looking at my son, who had stopped in the kitchen doorway and was staring at me like he was seeing something that shouldn't exist. Like I was a person from a different life. His mouth moved, but nothing came out. "Hey, buddy," I said. That was all I could manage. He said, "Dad," and I heard his voice crack on the one syllable, and something in my chest came completely undone. Leah crossed the room quickly. "This really isn't a great time, Walter. We're hosting." She said it quietly, close to me, in that tone she had, the one that was polite on the surface and something else entirely underneath. I looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then I walked past her into the kitchen. My son was gripping the counter with both hands. The kitchen was a disaster. Dishes stacked, pots on every burner, a grocery receipt on the counter that was 3 pages long. He'd cooked all of this for a party he hadn't been invited to enjoy. "When did you eat last?" I asked him. He laughed, but not the good kind. "I'm fine, Dad. That's not what I asked." He didn't answer. I pulled out a bar stool and sat down at the kitchen island. "Then I'll wait." He looked at me. For the first time since I walked in, he really looked at me. His eyes were wet. He pressed his lips together hard and turned back to the stove. The party continued in the other room like nothing had happened. I stayed in that kitchen for 2 hours. I didn't say anything to the guests. I didn't say anything more to Leah. I just sat there while my son moved back and forth between the stove and the sink, and slowly, his shoulders came down from around his ears. At some point, he made himself a plate and ate it standing at the counter. He ate fast, like someone who was used to not having time to sit down. I watched that and felt a quiet, cold fury settle into my bones. The kind that doesn't go away. When the last guests were leaving, I was still there. Leah passed through the kitchen twice, and both times she looked at me like I was something on her shoe. On her way back through, she said, "I think it's time for you to head home, Walter. Long drive." I said, "I'll leave when my son asks me to." My son said nothing, so I stayed. After the door closed on the last guest, Leah dropped the performance. She stood in the living room with her arms crossed and said, "You had no right to show up here like this." "Where has he been for 11 days, Leah? He's been right here. He's been busy, the same as anyone. He didn't answer his phone. He doesn't want to talk to you." She said it smoothly, the way you say something you've practiced. "He's told me that. He finds these visits stressful." I looked at my son. He was staring at the floor. "Is that true?" I asked him. He didn't answer. That silence was its own kind of answer, not the one she wanted. The kind that happens when someone has been told so many times what they think that they can't remember anymore whether it's true. I drove to the nearest motel that night. I didn't sleep. I sat in a chair by the window and I thought about the last 3 years. The wedding I hadn't been fully welcome at, the holidays that kept getting canceled at the last minute, the voice on the phone that was always slightly too careful, like my son was talking with someone else in the room. I had told myself he was fine, he was an adult, he didn't need me. I had believed it because it was easier than the alternative. I called my brother-in-law the next morning. He's former military, works private security now, knows people. I didn't ask him to do anything dramatic. I just said, "Tell me everything you can find on Leah's finances." What he sent me back 48 hours later was a thick file. Leah's credit history, all in my son's name. 4 cards, 2 car payments, a business loan for a boutique clothing line she'd started and quietly shut down after 18 months. All opened after the wedding. My son's income, which was good, he's a structural engineer, had been paying for all of it. His own savings account, which I knew he'd had since he was 19 years old, had been closed. There was a new joint account. Only she had the login. My son did not own a single thing. I went back to their house that afternoon. Leah's car wasn't in the driveway. I knocked, and my son answered, still in the same gray shirt, and when he saw it was just me, the relief on his face was so naked and so brief that I almost missed it. I said, "Can I come in?" He stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table and I put the file down in front of him. I didn't say anything. I just let him read. He read for a long time. I watched his face. He wasn't shocked in the way you'd expect. He was shocked in the way someone is when they felt something for a long time, and here, finally, is the proof that they weren't imagining it. It's a particular kind of devastation. I've only seen it once before, on my wife's face when the doctor confirmed the diagnosis. "She said she was handling everything," he said finally. His voice was flat. "She said I was bad with money, that I always forgot to pay things, that she was protecting us. She was protecting herself," I said, "with your name on it." He pushed the folder away and put his face in his hands. I put my hand on his shoulder and I didn't say anything else. Sometimes there's nothing to say. He stayed at the motel with me that night. He brought one bag. He didn't tell Leah where he was going. He just left, and I think some part of him had been waiting for permission to do exactly that for a very long time. The next morning he ate breakfast. Real breakfast, sitting down. He ordered eggs and toast, and he ate all of it. And when the waitress refilled his coffee, he said thank you and smiled, and it was the most alive I'd seen him look since he was maybe 25. We talked for 4 hours. He told me things slowly, carefully, like he was checking each one to see if I believe him. The parties she hosted, that he was never quite a guest at. The night she told him he was depressed, that he needed help, that his thinking wasn't right. The time he'd called his friend Owen, and she later cried for 2 hours saying he was choosing other people over her. The way he'd stopped calling me not because he didn't want to, but because every call ended in a fight and he was too tired for more fighting. She made me feel like the problem was always me, he said. Like if I could just be better, it would be okay. I nodded. I didn't interrupt. I almost believed it, he said. I know, I said. That's what it's designed to do. 2 days later, Leah started calling. First my son, then me. When I didn't answer, she drove to the motel. I watched from the window as she sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes. My son sat next to me and watched too. He didn't go down. She came back the next morning with a different approach. Calm voice, reasonable tone. She knocked on the door of the room, and when I opened it, she said, "Walter, I think we need to talk like adults. Whatever he's told you, he's told me everything," I said. And I verified most of it independently. Something moved across her face. Gone in a half second. "He has a history of catastrophizing," she said. "He'll tell you himself once he's not in crisis." "He's not in crisis," I said. "He's eating. He's sleeping. He called his friend Owen last night for 40 minutes and came back laughing. He hasn't done that in how long? She didn't answer. I'm not your enemy, Leah, I said. But I am his father, and I'm not going anywhere. She looked past me into the room. My son was sitting on the bed and he met her eyes and he didn't move. That was the whole answer. She left. The divorce attorney my brother-in-law recommended was a woman named, I'll just call her the attorney, who had been doing family law for 22 years and had a manner about her that I found immediately reassuring. She didn't waste a single sentence. She went through the financial file with my son over 2 sessions, and by the end of it she said very quietly, "This is a documented pattern of financial abuse and coercive control. We have a strong case." The word abuse hit my son hard. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I kept thinking it wasn't bad enough to call it that." She looked at him steadily. "It was." He nodded once, pressed his lips together, looked out the window. I looked at my hand so he wouldn't see my face. The process took months. Leah was not graceful about it. She filed a counterclaim alleging emotional abuse on his part. She sent a long email to his employer making vague insinuations about his mental stability. She called my son's friends, one by one, the few she knew about, and told them her version, which was elaborate and detailed and entirely backwards. Some of them believed her. That was hard. Owen didn't. Owen had known my son since middle school, and when Leah called him, he listened politely, thanked her, hung up, and then called my son and said, "What do you need?" He came down the following weekend and the 3 of us ate takeout on the motel floor and watched a terrible action movie, and my son laughed, really laughed, for the first time in longer than I could track. Small things. That's where people come back to themselves, not in courtrooms, not in dramatic confrontations, in bad movies and cold takeout and somebody who just shows up. I stayed in town. I rented a furnished apartment month to month. My son moved in after the motel became impractical, and we navigated the strange arrangement of a father and a 31-year-old sharing a 2-bedroom without getting in each other's way. He went to work. He came home. He started running in the mornings, which he'd done in college, and stopped somewhere in the marriage. I watched him get incrementally more solid, the way a building gets solid. You can't see it happening, but one day you notice it standing differently. The financial case settled out of court. The joint account was dissolved. The debts tied to his name were assigned back to her by the judge. His savings, what remained, were returned. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And the attorney had made sure that Leah's pattern was formally documented in the court record. That mattered, not just legally. It mattered because it was real and written down and could not be revised. The email to his employer had gone nowhere. His boss had called him in, handed him a printed copy and said, "I want you to know I'm ignoring this, and I need you to tell me if anything else like it comes in." My son came home from that conversation and stood in the kitchen for a minute not saying anything. And then said, "I forgot that people can just be decent." I didn't say anything. I just poured him a glass of water and handed it to him. The day the divorce was finalized, we didn't celebrate. He came home from the attorney's office, and we sat on the apartment balcony and drank coffee and watched traffic for a while. After a long silence, he said, "I feel like I lost 3 years." "You didn't lose them," I said. "You spent them surviving something that would have broken a lot of people. That's not the same." He was quiet. "Your mother used to say something," I said. "She said the only way out is through, and the only way through is forward." I paused. "I know that sounds like a bumper sticker." He laughed, just briefly, a little. "She was right, though." He nodded slowly. We sat there until it got dark. I thought about all the times I hadn't shown up when I should have, all the calls I'd let go to voicemail, all the holiday cancellations I'd accepted without pushing back. I thought about 11 days of silence and what might have happened if I'd waited for 12. I didn't say any of that to him. It wasn't the time, and maybe there's no right time for it. Some things you just have to carry. He started seeing a therapist in the spring. He told me about it matter-of-factly, the way he'd tell me he was going to the dentist. He said she was good and didn't push too hard. "She asked me when I first started not trusting myself," he said. "I had to think about it for a really long time. I asked him if he figured out the answer. He said, working on it. That was enough. By summer, he had moved into his own place. Small apartment near the water with a balcony where he put one of those canvas folding chairs and a small table for his coffee. He bought a used guitar from a pawn shop he used to play in high school, and on the first night I visited, he played a few chords, badly and without embarrassment, and the sound of it in that small space was just about the most hopeful thing I'd heard in years. Owen visited. The friend who hadn't believed Leah, and the two who had, gradually came back around. People are complicated. I've stopped expecting otherwise. As for Leah, I heard through a mutual connection that she'd moved to another city and was very publicly dating someone new. I hope that man has people who pay attention. I hope he has a father, or a brother, or a friend who would drive 4 hours without calling ahead if his phone went silent for 11 days. That's all you can do sometimes. Hope the next person has someone watching out for them. My son called me one evening in August. I was at home, just sitting on my own porch, watching the light change, and when his name came up on my screen, I answered on the first ring the way I always do now. "Hey," he said. "You busy this weekend?" "Not at all," I said. "I found a hiking trail, the kind Mom used to like. Long and kind of brutal, but with a good view at the top." I said yes before he finished the sentence. We went that Saturday. It was long and kind of brutal. We didn't talk much on the way up. Just breathed and walked, and occasionally I threatened to turn around and he called my bluff. At the top, we found a flat rock and sat on it and looked out at everything. He had a thermos of coffee. He poured me a cup. The coffee was terrible. He's never learned how to make it strong enough, and I drank it without saying a word. After a while, he said, "I'm glad you came that day." "I know," I said. "You could have called first." "I could have." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad you didn't," he said. I looked out at the view. It was the kind that earns the climb. The kind his mother would have stood in front of with her hands on her hips, and that specific satisfied expression she had for moments that came out right. I thought about all the ways love shows up quietly. A folder left on a kitchen table. A night in a motel parking lot that someone doesn't walk down to. A cup of bad coffee at the top of something hard. I didn't say any of that. I just refilled his cup and handed it back. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any grand philosophical way. Just in the quiet, practical way that comes when you've watched something play out from beginning to end, and you can finally see the whole shape of it. Leah didn't lose because I outmaneuvered her. She lost because of what she had been doing for 3 years before I ever walked through that door. Every account she opened in my son's name. Every friend she cut him off from. Every night she told him his thinking wasn't right. All of it was building toward a collapse she didn't see coming because she was too busy managing the surface to notice what was cracking underneath. That's the thing about control. It feels like strength from the inside. From the outside, it looks exactly like what it is. Fear dressed up as power. My son, and I say this as someone who watched him disappear and come back, had more integrity in those 3 years of silence than most people show in a lifetime of noise. He didn't retaliate. He didn't blow it up. He endured, and he quietly kept the receipts, and when the moment came, he was ready. That's not luck. That's character. You don't build that overnight. You build it by being the kind of person who, even when you're being told daily that you're the problem, holds on to some small, quiet part of yourself that knows better. I think about what I could have done differently. I think about it more than I'd like to admit. I waited too long. I told myself he was an adult and didn't need his father checking in, and what I was really doing was making peace with my own discomfort instead of paying attention to someone I love. That's on me. If there's one thing I want anyone to take from any of this, it's that paying attention is not the same as interfering. Showing up is not the same as overstepping. There is a version of respect that becomes neglect, and I lived in that version for too long. What pulled my son through wasn't dramatic. It was Owen showing up with takeout. It was a therapist who didn't push too hard. It was mornings running by the water, a beat-up guitar from a pawn shop, bad coffee at the top of a hard trail. People come back to themselves through small things, through the ordinary texture of a life that belongs to them again. That's not a small thing. That's everything. I'm not the hero of this story. I'm just a father who almost waited too long and didn't. What my son did, the daily act of rebuilding trust in himself after someone spent years dismantling it, that takes a kind of courage that doesn't get enough credit. It's not loud. It doesn't make headlines. It looks like eating breakfast sitting down. It looks like answering the phone when a friend calls. It looks like planting a chair on a balcony and deciding that small space is yours. He earned that view from the top of that trail. I just made sure he had someone to drink bad coffee with at the summit.